So we try to incorporate all of that because if you're talking about holistic medicine, instead of it being HOLISTIC, I hope I spelled that right, we're talking about holistic, WHOLE, wanting to be whole. And to be whole, you gotta incorporate all three of those: body, mind, and spirit. So today we're going to take the next step on the body. Is now that you have your hormones straight, I'm going to assume that you've gone through that part of my school course, and I always try and point you toward the school course. But now we're going to go to the next step. And this is talking about epigenetics. How can you how can you slow down aging or either reverse aging? And the first thing that we have to get across is that a lot of people think that their DNA controls their whole life. It controls how they're going to live, what kind of diseases they're going to have, when they're going to die. And it's like, hey, it's just in my DNA. It's just in my genes. That's just how I am. Well, that is not true. What is really going on in your DNA, you have all of this different information. And scientists think that you only use about 10% of that information. And they used to call the rest of that information junk genes. It didn't do anything. It just sat there dormant. Well, one thing in nature is very conservative. It doesn't just do things for the heck of it. Everything has a purpose. And just like you and your life has a purpose, your DNA, all of it has a purpose. We just are now discovering what those purposes are, what the purpose is. And it's all about epigenetics. There's a series on Gaia, the Gaia channel, GAIA, that's how I pronounce it, Gaia, that's called Inner Evolution. And this is a cell biologist. I'll think of his name in just a minute. But he's a cell biologist who really discovered epigenetics. And what epigenetics, epi means above the DNA. So you look at it like it turns DNA on and off. And there's switches that increase your aging process. And then there's these switches that can decrease your aging process. And it's primarily governed by something called methylation. We're going to get into that when I get into the slides. And are we okay, Rebel?
Yes, we are.
Okay, it said something about this only audio only. Okay, all right. So when we get into the slides, we're going to talk about how that's done. But today we're going to talk about how do you either stop or reverse aging. And this is the thing. I am always interested in how can we test something. The reason why I got into saliva testing and hormones is because when I learned about OBGYN, we didn't test for hormones. And so I always felt like we were guessing. It was always trial and error. So that's how I learned about the saliva testing, because it was a way to test where a person was. You could implement a therapy, and then you could retest to make sure that you had corrected that issue. So then when we went to the stress connection, I learned something that you cannot manage what you cannot measure. So when people say you should manage your stress better, that's very hard to do if you don't measure it. So that's why we went into cortisol testing. You can measure stress by looking at heart rate variability. So when you're looking at agelessness or being ageless, I wanted to have a test. And there's a test called True Diagnostics that can look at how those switches are being turned on and off. And you can actually see what organ systems are aging prematurely so that you can take special care to try and correct those problems. And you can see how well or how poorly you're aging. And then you can take steps to try and reverse that. And then you can retest and see that, hey, yes, I have slowed down my aging process. And most of the time when we think about aging, we're thinking about how can we live healthier. And that's what this test does, is make sure that if you see that an organ system is aging you prematurely, that's likely where you could have some type of disease. So that if we can find this information out earlier, it's going to benefit us so much more, because the earlier you find something, the easier it is to correct it. So let's go to the slides. My dog is giving me trouble here. So anyway, can you reverse aging? What epigenetics and your DNA really say? So modern science is challenging our fundamental assumptions about aging. See, so what if your biological clock could be rewound? And believe it or not, you can do that. Now, this presentation explores the cutting edge science of epigenetics and its profound implications on extending not just your lifespan, but your health span. Because there's a song that says, everybody wants to live forever, but no one wants to grow old. And that is so true. We all want to live forever, but we don't want to live forever or live longer and be unhealthy and not have vitality and not be productive in society and not be a burden on our children or anyone. So we all want to live a long time, but the key is our health span equal to our lifespan? So you could live 90 years, but you can only, if you're only healthy for 60 of those, is that really what you want? And so that's what we're talking about today. How can you make sure that health span lasts as long as your lifespan or as close as possible? So we'll go to the next slide. So what is epigenetics? Let me make this a little bit bigger here. What is epigenetics? Well, your genetic code remains fixed throughout your life. So you're right, you cannot change your genes. But epigenetics determines how those genes are expressed or silenced. So think of your DNA as hardware and epigenetics as your software that controls it. So, you know, your computer has all these programs on here. And then some of those programs can be viruses. And you want to make sure that you keep those virus programs off. And I'm just talking about computer. And so you want some switches to be turned off and you want some switches to be turned on. Things that are going to rejuvenate you and repair tissue, you want all of those switches to be on. But the ones that are causing you to decay quicker, and those are mostly stress hormones, you want those to be turned off. And there's ways to do both of those. All right. So 4 key factors influence your epigenetic expression. Number 1 is nutrition. What you put in your mouth. You got to think that the only way your body can really get what it needs to repair itself and to rejuvenate itself is by the nutrients that you put in your mouth, and the ones that are actually digested and absorbed by your gut. So what you eat and the health of your gut are probably the most important things that you can do to extend your life. It's no doubt about it that what you eat and what you're exposed to, that is what turns these genes on and off. Now, I told you stress, and you know, I talk about stress all the time and the stress connection. Stress disrupts everything. It disrupts your epigenetics, it disrupts your genes, it disrupts every organ system in your body. So that's why we talk about meditation. That's why I went to this Joe Dispenza advanced course, is to understand how meditation influences biology. And it's primarily by turning off those stress epigenetic switches. And that is so, so, so important, because when you're under stress, your body is only thinking about the present moment. It's not thinking about repair. It's not thinking about rejuvenation. It will destroy everything in your body just to get you through that stress. And if you're under constant stress, that's what deteriorates every organ system in your body, especially your immune system, which is there to protect you. And so it suppresses the immune system, but the body is thinking that the immune system is trying to protect you from an illness that's a year or two from now. But if you're in the stress mode, you're only thinking about getting out of the stress at that second or that minute. And so therefore, all of the long-term repair switches get turned off and the short-term switches get turned on. And that is how disease happens. And then sleep. Quality rest enables cellular repair and regeneration. I tell a patient, nothing gets better if you don't sleep. And so sleep is so important. That's when these cells called natural killer cells come out, and they look for cancer cells early on. Sleep is when your body takes in all of the nutrients and distributes them so that your body can use them in the proper way. And I will tell you the other thing that's important is nighttime sleep. I tell any patient who is working the night shift that that is a detriment to your health, because your body needs sleep when the sun is down. You are in rhythm with nature, and you're supposed to sleep when it's dark outside. And when you don't, it disrupts your chronobiology. And when I talk about that, is your biology based on rhythms. And so there was a study that because I was in OB, I found this study that OB nurses who worked the night shift on a consistent basis for, I think it was for more than 10 years, that they had a much higher increased risk of breast cancer, and just by working on the night shift. And that's been shown in other in other professions, not just OB nurses. So sleep is so important, and having sleep at the right time of day is also important. All right, we'll go to the next one. I think I control it. Yeah. So I like this test called a True Age test. And how it works, it tests for DNA methylation patterns. And you've heard of MTHR. It's when you can't methylate properly. And so that can increase your risk of disease, and that can increase aging. So this looks at DNA methylation patterns. That's why people take methylated folic acid to try and control methylation. So this is specific chemical markers that accumulate on your DNA to precisely measure biological age at a cellular level. So this advanced testing technology emerged from decades of research at top institutions, including Harvard, Stanford, and UCLA. And that's what I'm talking about. You want to be able to test, like, what, I used to speak for this anti-aging, for two anti-aging medicine organizations. And I never understood how, because a lot of times you would have these protocols, and they put you on everything under the sun, and you're paying 10, 15, 20, $30,000 to quote unquote do anti-aging. Well, I don't think that's in the realm of most people's budget. And so that's why I love this test. The test is like $3.99, but